What if I told you that the most powerful voice you'll ever hear is the one that speaks in silence? For 21 days, I stopped talking, not a single word. And what I discovered in that silence changed everything. In a world addicted to noise, I found peace, power, and purpose in absolute quiet. When I entered silence for the first time, I thought it would be peaceful, like sitting quietly in a room with no distractions. But within hours, I realized silence isn't empty, it's loud. When you take away the noise of the world, the voices, the phones, the notifications, the constant talking, what's left is you. And that can be the most uncomfortable sound you'll ever hear. Because suddenly, you can't escape your thoughts anymore. Every regret, every fear, every insecurity starts to rise from the quiet corners of your mind. It's like standing in front of a mirror that reflects not your face, but your soul. In those moments, I faced truths I had buried under business, the things I pretended didn't hurt, the emotions I kept running from, the parts of myself I never made peace with. At first, I wanted to quit. I wanted to speak, to distract myself, to scroll through something, to escape. But I stayed, and as the hours turned into days, something shifted. The noise in my head began to settle. The chaos slowly turned into clarity. I started to hear a voice I hadn't heard in a long time. My inner voice. It wasn't loud. It was calm, gentle, honest. It didn't shout, it whispered. And for the first time, I listened. That voice told me things I didn't want to admit. That I was overworking to prove my worth. That I feared silence because I was scared of who I'd find inside it. That I had been living for approval instead of peace. And once I saw those truths, I couldn't unsee them. Silence didn't expose me to the world, it exposed me to myself. It was uncomfortable, yes, but it was real. And in that raw, unfiltered space, I discovered something powerful. That transformation doesn't always begin with action. Sometimes it begins when everything stops. Because silence strips away the lies we tell ourselves. And what remains is authenticity. When you stop speaking, you start hearing. When you stop pretending, you start healing. Silence became my greatest teacher, not because it told me something new, but because it made me finally listen to what had always been within me. That is the truth nobody talks about. Silence doesn't just quiet the world around you, it amplifies the truth inside you. When you stop talking and truly immerse yourself in silence, something remarkable begins to happen. Your awareness starts to expand. In the noise of daily life, most people live half awake. We rush from one moment to another, constantly reacting, scrolling, responding, and running, rarely stopping long enough to observe what's really happening within and around us. But when I entered silence, it was as if the entire world slowed down and I started to see again. I began to notice things I had never paid attention to before. The rhythm of my breathing, the tiny details in nature, the sound of my own heartbeat. I could feel how my body reacted to thoughts, how emotions would rise and fall like waves, and how much of my energy was being wasted on things that didn't matter. That's what awareness does. It holds up a mirror not just to your mind, but to your habits, your reactions, and your inner patterns. In the beginning, it's uncomfortable. Awareness forces you to confront how automatic your life has become. You realize how often you speak without meaning, react without thinking, and judge without understanding. You see how your mind jumps from one thing to another, unable to sit still for even a minute. But slowly, silence trains you to watch instead of react. You begin to observe your thoughts instead of being consumed by them. You start noticing how every feeling has a story behind it: fear, pride, anger, insecurity, and how much of your stress comes not from the world, but from the noise inside your own head. There were moments when I caught myself getting irritated or restless, even though nothing was happening around me. That's when I realized awareness isn't just about noticing what's outside, it's about understanding what's happening inside. It's about seeing the difference between what is real and what is just a reaction created by your mind. I learned that awareness is like light. The more it shines, the less darkness can control you. And as my awareness grew, I started to feel a strange sense of calm. The same things that used to trigger me lost their power. The same emotions that once overwhelmed me became easier to manage. I began to choose my responses instead of being ruled by them. Silence gave me space to pause, and in that pause, awareness became my superpower. It's a quiet kind of strength, not loud, not dramatic, but deeply grounding. You begin to understand that awareness is the first step to mastery. When you are aware, you can change. When you are unaware, you repeat. Awareness turns ordinary moments into lessons and every emotion into an opportunity to grow. So, in those 21 days of silence, I didn't gain control over the world. I gained awareness of myself. And that awareness became the foundation for every transformation that followed. It's the kind of power that doesn't shout for attention, but it changes everything you touch. Because once you're aware, you can never go back to living unconsciously again. Clarity is something we all say we want, but most of us never truly experience it because our minds are constantly drowning in noise. During those 21 days of silence, I learned that confusion doesn't always come from not knowing what to do. It comes from hearing too many voices at once. Everyone around us has opinions, advice, expectations, and judgments. The world is constantly shouting, do this, be that, go there, achieve more. And somewhere in that chaos, our own inner voice gets buried. When I stopped speaking and allowed silence to take over, all those outer voices began to fade. At first, it was uncomfortable. I could feel my thoughts racing, trying to fill the empty space with worries, plans, and endless what ifs. But as the days passed, something started to shift. The fog in my mind began to clear. The more I resisted the urge to talk or distract myself, the more I could see. Not with my eyes, but with my mind. I started understanding what truly mattered to me, what I was chasing out of fear, and what I actually wanted deep inside. Clarity is like cleaning a dirty window. You don't realize how blurred your vision was until you wipe away the dust. Silence did that for me. It cleared away the noise of comparison, the weight of expectations, and the endless pressure to always have an answer. When everything became still, I could finally separate what was real from what was temporary. I could tell the difference between my true desires and the desires that had been planted in me by society. I realized how much time I had wasted worrying about things that didn't matter. I saw how often I tried to please everyone but myself. I noticed how my decisions were being influenced by fear of judgment, fear of failure, fear of being misunderstood. But when you sit in silence long enough, those fears lose their power. You start to see through them. You start to notice that clarity doesn't come when you have all the answers. It comes when you finally stop asking the wrong questions. There was one moment I'll never forget, sitting outside early in the morning, no phone, no music, just the sound of wind and birds. For the first time in a long while, my mind wasn't running in circles. It felt calm, still, simple. And in that simplicity, I realized something profound. Clarity is not something you find, it's something that emerges when you remove the unnecessary. I didn't need to figure everything out. I didn't need a perfect plan. I just needed to quiet the noise long enough to hear my intuition. And that voice, the one that had been buried under all the chaos, started guiding me with such gentleness and precision that I wondered how I ever ignored it before. Through silence, I learned that clarity isn't a sudden moment of enlightenment. It's a process of letting go of opinions, distractions, fears, and the constant need to control everything. It's realizing that you already know what's right for you, but your mind has been too loud to listen. By the end of those 21 days, I wasn't confused anymore. Not because life had become easier, but because I had become clearer. Silence gave me a new kind of vision, one that could see beyond noise, beyond emotion, beyond doubt. And once you experience that kind of clarity, you can never live blindly again. Clarity isn't a single bright flash of understanding, it's what begins to form when the noise fades. At first, when everything around me went quiet, my thoughts didn't stop. They actually became louder. All the scattered plans, the half-formed worries, the voices of people I'd listened to for years kept echoing in my head. I realized how much of my thinking wasn't truly mine. For days it felt like trying to see through fog, but each hour of silence acted like a gentle wind, pushing that fog away. I started noticing how cluttered my mind had been. Every decision I'd made before was layered with other people's expectations. What I should achieve, how I should appear, what success should look like. In silence, those borrowed ideas began to fall off one by one. Beneath them, I could finally sense what I actually believed. I began to distinguish between the things that filled me and the things that only looked impressive from the outside. The quiet made space for honesty. When no one else's opinions were in the room, I could ask myself questions that had no easy answers. What do I truly value? What kind of life feels genuine to me? For the first time, the answers weren't rushed or forced. They rose slowly, like reflections on still water. Clarity also changed how I saw time. I stopped jumping ahead to what might happen and began living inside the present moment. Simple things, a single breath, the warmth of sunlight, the sound of footsteps, became sharper, almost sacred. The more I noticed, the clearer I became about what mattered. I realized that most confusion isn't about not knowing enough. It's about paying attention to too many things at once. There came a morning when I woke up, looked at the world, and it simply made sense. Not because all my problems had disappeared, but because I could finally see them for what they were: temporary, solvable, human. Silence had filtered out the unnecessary so the essential could speak. That's the gift of clarity. It doesn't give you new answers, it removes the noise, that hides the truth you already carry inside. Emotional healing is something we often associate with time, with talking, or with finding someone who will understand our pain. But what I discovered in those 21 days of silence is that healing doesn't always come from words. Sometimes it begins when all the words stop. In the beginning, the silence was uncomfortable, almost unbearable. Without music, conversation, or distraction, I had no choice but to sit face to face with everything I had been avoiding for years. Memories I thought I had forgotten came rushing back. Moments that hurt me, people I had lost, mistakes I had made, they all rose to the surface, demanding to be felt. At first, it was overwhelming. I wanted to push those emotions away, to drown them out with something, anything. But there was nowhere to run. So I stayed. I sat there and allowed the silence to hold me, even when it felt heavy. And slowly, something shifted. I realized that the pain wasn't trying to destroy me, it was trying to be acknowledged. For so long, I had buried it under busyness, under smiles, under the constant need to appear strong. But silence stripped all of that away. There was no performance left, no pretending. There was only truth. And in that raw honesty, healing began. Not instantly, not magically, but gently, like a wound finally getting the air it needs to close. I started to understand that emotions are not enemies, they are messengers. Every sadness had something to teach me. Every fear carried a truth I needed to face. I realized that healing doesn't mean forgetting what hurt you, it means changing your relationship with it. It means no longer letting it control your peace. There were nights during those 21 days when tears came without warning. But instead of fighting them, I let them fall. Each tear felt like a release, as if years of unspoken pain were quietly leaving my body. I had always thought that being strong meant holding everything in. But silence showed me that real strength is softness, it's honesty, it's the courage to feel without resistance. As the days passed, I started noticing a lightness in my heart. The same memories that once made me ache now made me grateful, because they had shaped me. I began forgiving people, not because they deserved it, but because I deserved peace. I started forgiving myself for not knowing better at times when I didn't have the wisdom I have now. And in that forgiveness, something inside me started to bloom. Silence became a mirror that reflected not just my wounds, but also my resilience. It reminded me that healing isn't linear. Some days you feel whole, other days you feel broken again. But each moment of awareness, each moment of acceptance, brings you closer to wholeness. The stillness taught me that emotions don't need to be fixed, they need to be felt. And when I finally stopped resisting what hurt, I found something deeper than peace. I found understanding, the kind that doesn't need explanations or closure because it exists beyond logic. It's the quiet realization that everything that once broke you also built you. By the end of those 21 days, I didn't feel in the way I expected. I felt real. I was no longer hiding from my emotions, no longer pretending to be unshakable. I had made peace with my past, not by changing it, but by accepting it as part of me. Silence taught me that emotional healing isn't about forgetting the pain, it's about finding the strength to sit with it until it transforms into wisdom. And that transformation, though invisible to others, is one of the most profound gifts a human soul can ever experience. In silence, something strange begins to happen. Your eyes open wider, not just to the world around you, but to the truth beneath it. When I stopped talking, when I stopped filling every pause with sound, I began to notice details that I had always overlooked. The world, which once felt ordinary, suddenly became alive in ways I had never experienced before. The rustle of leaves wasn't just background noise anymore, it became music. The way people walked, spoke, or looked around revealed things I had never truly seen. Silence didn't just quiet my mouth, it awakened my senses. I realized that most of the time, we move through life half blind. We see, but we don't observe. We hear, but we don't listen. We exist, but we're not present. Our minds are so consumed with what to say next, what to post, what to plan, that we rarely stop to simply watch. But when I entered silence, I became a witness to life, not as a participant rushing to respond, but as an observer learning to understand. Watching people without judgment became one of the most powerful experiences of those 21 days. I started to notice how restless people are, how constantly we seek validation through noise, laughter that's too loud, conversations that go nowhere, opinions thrown like confetti to feel seen. I noticed how few people truly listen when others speak. Most are just waiting for their turn to talk. But when you stop talking, you start seeing the layers behind every interaction, the tension behind a smile, the insecurity behind a joke, the longing behind a glance. Silence sharpened my awareness of energy, the kind that people carry even when they say nothing. You begin to sense when someone's hurting, when someone's pretending, when someone's truly at peace. You start seeing the beauty and the pain that coexist in everyone, and that awareness changes the way you connect with others. You stop reacting, you stop judging, you start understanding. Observation became a form of meditation for me. I would sit for hours just watching the world move, the way sunlight shifted through the trees, the rhythm of footsteps on the ground, the way time seemed to stretch when I wasn't chasing it. In that stillness, I understood that life is always speaking to us. We just never slow down enough to hear it. I remember one particular afternoon, I was sitting near a garden and a small bird landed on the edge of a fountain. It drank, fluttered its wings, and flew away. Such a simple moment, but in silence it felt sacred. It reminded me that beauty doesn't always need grand gestures. Sometimes it's hidden in the smallest, most ordinary things. Silence gave me the eyes to see those things again. Observation also turned inward. I began to notice my own patterns, how my mind wandered, how my body reacted to emotions, how my thoughts shifted with time. I saw how quickly I judged myself and others without realizing it. But once I became aware of it, that judgment started to dissolve. Observation without reaction became my way of unlearning old habits. It taught me patience. It taught me humility. It taught me that not every situation needs my opinion. Not every silence needs to be filled. Not every discomfort needs to be fixed. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply watch, understand, and let life unfold as it is. Through silence, I learned that observation is not passive. It's transformative. It changes your relationship with the world. You begin to move slower, speak less, and understand more. You start valuing presence over performance, depth over noise, and truth over appearances. By the end of those 21 days, I realized that being observant is not just about seeing others, it's about awakening your own consciousness. The more you observe, the more you understand that everything and everyone carries a story. And when you truly start seeing with that kind of awareness, life stops being something you rush through. It becomes something you experience. Discipline is often spoken of as control, restriction, or routine, but during those 21 days of silence, I learned that real discipline is something much deeper. It's not about forcing yourself to follow rules. It's about creating inner strength so powerful that distractions lose their grip on you. Before I began my silence, I was constantly pulled in 1,000 directions: messages, conversations, responsibilities, the endless scroll of information. My attention was fragmented. I told myself I was busy, but in truth, I was scattered. Silence changed that. When everything external went quiet, I realized how addicted I had been to noise. I didn't just talk to communicate, I talked to avoid. I filled my days with movement and sound to keep from facing what stillness would reveal. The first few days were the hardest. My mind rebelled. I wanted to reach for my phone, to write something, to speak. Anything that would make me feel productive. But every time I resisted that urge, every time I chose to stay still, a new kind of strength started forming inside me. Silence demanded structure. I had to create my own rhythm, my own sense of order, because there was no external pressure guiding me. I woke up early, meditated, wrote my thoughts, and simply sat in awareness. And with each passing day, I learned that discipline isn't about punishing yourself. It's about honoring yourself. It's choosing not to give in to impulses that drain your energy. It's learning to say no, not just to others, but to the parts of you that crave constant stimulation. As the days went on, I became acutely aware of how much power distraction holds in our lives. The smallest notification, a passing thought, a random memory, they all fight for attention. But silence doesn't allow that chaos to hide anymore. It makes you confront how easily your focus slips away. It reveals how quickly your mind jumps from one thing to another, always searching for the next bit of comfort or excitement. There were moments when I felt restless, when the silence seemed too heavy to bear. That's when discipline whispered, "Stay." Stay through the discomfort, through the boredom, through the urge to escape. And each time I did, I grew stronger, not in a physical sense, but in a mental, emotional, and spiritual way. The more I stayed, the less the restlessness had control over me. The same silence that once felt suffocating began to feel empowering. By the second week, I noticed something incredible. My mind was becoming clear, sharp, and focused. The scattered energy that once drained me started to center. I could focus on a single breath for minutes without drifting. I could feel my awareness expand in ways I'd never known before. That's the reward of true discipline. Not perfection, but presence. Through silence, I realized that discipline is not about doing more. It's about doing what matters with full awareness. It's about mastering the small moments, waking up on time, keeping promises to yourself, sitting with discomfort without running from it. Those small moments become the foundation of inner peace. And once you build that foundation, distractions lose their power. There was a deep sense of freedom that came with this discipline. I didn't need to chase stimulation anymore. I didn't crave validation or noise. My mind was learning to obey stillness, to stay grounded even when my thoughts tried to wander. I discovered that self-control isn't about suppressing desires. It's about understanding them so deeply that they no longer rule you. By the end of the 21 days, I saw that discipline and silence are twins. One strengthens the other. Silence gives birth to discipline, and discipline deepens silence. Together, they shape you into someone unshakable, someone who doesn't need chaos to feel alive. And when you carry that kind of discipline within you, life changes. You become calm in storms, patient in waiting, and powerful in peace. That is the discipline silence teaches, not the kind that cages you, but the kind that sets you free. Peace is something everyone talks about, but very few people ever truly experience. We say we want peace, yet we spend our lives running after things that pull us further away from it. Before those 21 days of silence, I thought peace was something that happened when everything around me was calm, when people behaved kindly, when plans worked perfectly, when life finally gave me a break. But silence showed me a truth I had never considered before. Peace isn't something that comes from outside. It's something that grows quietly within you once the noise around and inside you begins to fade. In the first few days of silence, my mind was anything but peaceful. It screamed for attention, replayed memories, invented scenarios, and created problems that didn't even exist. I began to see how restless my mind truly was, how it jumped from thought to thought like a bird that couldn't land. I used to believe that the word made me anxious, but in silence, I realized that it was my mind's addiction to noise that created most of my suffering. The more I sat with the chaos inside, the more I saw that peace isn't the absence of noise. It's the ability to remain still even while the noise exists. There were moments when I would sit outside and simply breathe. The sound of the wind, the distant hum of life, the rise and fall of my own breath, they all started to feel like parts of one enormous rhythm. For the first time in years, I wasn't rushing to the next thing. I wasn't trying to fix anything. I was just being, that simple state of being, with no pressure to perform or prove, was where peace began to settle in. It didn't arrive with fireworks or grand emotions. It came softly, like the quiet arrival of dawn after a long night. As the days passed, I noticed something else. The things that once disturbed me no longer had the same power. Thoughts that would usually send me spiraling now came and went like passing clouds. I started to understand that peace doesn't mean you stop thinking, it means your thoughts stop controlling you. Silence taught me to watch them drift by without grabbing onto them. The moment I stopped fighting every thought, every emotion, I felt a lightness that I had never known. I realized how much we depend on chaos to feel alive. We fill our days with noise because stillness scares us. We chase attention, validation, and constant stimulation because silence confronts us with ourselves. But once you learn to make peace with silence, you no longer need to fill every moment. You stop chasing and you start existing. That is where real peace begins. Not in the perfection of your surroundings, but in the acceptance of your inner world. One evening, during the last week of my silence, I sat watching the sunset. The sky slowly turned from gold to orange to deep purple. I didn't speak, didn't move. I just watched. And in that stillness, something profound happened. I felt connected to everything: the sky, the earth, the air, and the quiet pulse of life around me. There were no words to describe it. There was no separation between me and the world. It was peace in its purest form, not as a thought, but as a feeling that filled every cell of my being. I began to understand that peace isn't fragile, it's powerful. It doesn't mean being untouched by life's storms. It means knowing you can stand in the middle of them without being swept away. It's the calm that stays when everything else falls apart. Silence trained me to return to that calm again and again, no matter what was happening outside. By the end of those 21 days, peace had become a habit. It wasn't something I needed to look for anymore. It was something I carried within me. I learned that when you protect your inner stillness, no chaos can truly harm you. You stop being a prisoner of circumstances and become the master of your own state of mind. That's what silence gave me. Not escape, not emptiness, but peace that feels alive. A peace that doesn't depend on the world being quiet, but on you learning how to be still within yourself. And once you taste that kind of peace, you realize it's not just a moment, it's a way of living. When I stopped speaking for 21 days, I realized something I had never noticed before. We waste so many words. We speak constantly, but so little of what we say carries real meaning. We talk to fill silence, to avoid awkwardness, to prove something, to feel seen, and in doing so, we forget the true power of speech. In silence, this truth revealed itself slowly but deeply. Every time I felt the urge to speak, I would ask myself, why? Why do I need to say this? What purpose does it serve? And most of the time, the answer was startling. I didn't need to say it at all. At first, this realization made me uncomfortable. I had spent my whole life surrounded by words. They were how I expressed, how I connected, how I felt alive. But when I stopped using them, I began to see how often words become noise, meaningless fillers that mask what we truly feel. Silence became like a mirror that reflected every unnecessary word I had ever spoken. I saw how many times I talked just to be heard, not to understand. How many times I used words to defend myself, to prove I was right, to avoid vulnerability. In silence, I understood that real communication doesn't always require language. Sometimes, the most powerful form of expression is presence. I started to notice how much could be said through a single glance, a gesture, a calm breath. The people who once relied on words to explain themselves began to make sense to me through their energy, their rhythm, their quiet expressions. I learned to listen, not to what people said, but to what they meant. And that changed everything. There is a kind of honesty that comes only from quiet. Without the ability to speak, I had to face moments where I wanted to explain myself, to justify, to argue, but I couldn't. I had to sit in the discomfort of being misunderstood. And that was one of the hardest lessons of all. I realized how much we rely on words to control how others see us. We use them to manage perception, to build an image. But when you remove that shield, when you let silence speak for you, you discover who you really are underneath all the explanations. As the days went by, I began to appreciate the sacredness of words. I thought about how casually we throw them around, promises we don't keep, compliments we don't mean, gossip we don't need to share. I realized that every word carries energy. It can heal or it can harm. It can build trust or it can destroy it. When I finally spoke again after those 21 days, I noticed how differently I used my voice. I didn't want to waste words anymore. I wanted them to matter. I wanted them to be clean, intentional, real. Silence taught me that speaking less doesn't make you weak. It makes your words stronger. When you speak from stillness, from a place of awareness rather than impulse, people feel it. They listen differently because they can sense the truth behind your words. I also learned that not every moment needs commentary. Some moments are too beautiful to interrupt with speech. They deserve silence. There was one morning when I was sitting by myself, watching the rain. Normally, I would have described it in words, how it sounded, how it felt. But that morning, I didn't say anything. I just experienced it. And in that stillness, I realized that language, as powerful as it is, can sometimes limit experience. Silence allowed me to feel fully without trying to define everything. I began to notice the peace that comes from restraint, the power of holding back when words are needed. How many arguments could dissolve if we simply stayed quiet for a moment? How many relationships could heal if we listened more than we spoke? Silence taught me that wisdom doesn't shout. It listens, observes, and speaks only when there's something worth saying. By the end of those 21 days, my relationship with speech had completely changed. I no longer needed to fill every gap with words. I had learned that sometimes silence is the most eloquent language there is. Words are precious, and when they come from a quiet heart, they don't need to be many. They just need to be true. Now, when I speak slower. I choose each word as if it were sacred. I pause before answering, not because I'm unsure, but because I want to make sure my words add value instead of noise. Silence taught me that it's not about saying more, it's about saying right. And that realization, that reverence for speech, became one of the most powerful transformations of all.